taking the slot. I do apologise if the office dogs bark, but they're all laid out, having snooze. Just wait for the social media lights to go live. Ebenezer's going to join us shortly. Simon is in Palm Beach. Ebenezer's in beautiful Ghana in the Volta River. James, we're not sure where he is. He claims he's up north. We don't know whether that's Finland or Scarborough. Is that up north? Well, time will tell. Right, all live. Hello, everyone. My name is Max McGillivray from Beanstalk Global. One of my favorite organizations that I'm involved with because of the good that they're doing, mainly because of the likes of these individuals that we've got on, Fairmiles. And the broadcast title today is Airfreight and Net Zero. How can we take a balanced approach to ensure a brighter future for everyone? We were just talking in the green room. There's nothing, not going to be anything overly formal about this broadcast. This is a catch up about Fairmiles. Gents, I didn't say in the green room that I've had a number of people dialed in who are very interested in this subject and either haven't heard of Fairmiles or have, and just want to get an update as to where Fairmiles is and the problem in general. Just for those that are listening in on the podcast, I just want to read out a little bit of the marketing so that everyone knows the context of this. Climate change is real and demands an urgent and radical response if we are to adapt to the significant threat it poses to our planet. However, with increasing pressure on organizations to act, there's a growing risk that net zero strategies that seek to reduce emissions by restricting imported or air freighted food end up alienating and negatively impacting economically less developed countries to the detriment of livelihoods and rural communities. Fairmiles has been formed by an alliance of organisations representing fresh produce businesses, academia, and the international development sector. Our aim is to establish a just and equitable strategy consistent with the principles of climate justice to ensure we achieve net zero without stopping vital market access for developing world producers. Our founding partners include the ODI, University of Northampton, University of Exeter, COLEAD, Beanstalk Global, and Blue Skies. Just going to run around everyone. Simon, introduce yourself, please.
Oh, hi, Max. Yep, I'm Simon, Head of Sustainability at Blue Skies, and also part of the team which has put together Fairmiles 2.0, as we're calling, because as we'll find out in a moment, Fairmiles came about quite some time ago. But yeah, that's who I am.
Excellent. And just to hammer home this point, can you just describe Blue Skies in Ghana? How many people will they employ, and the ecosystem of all those people that are employed in Ghana, please? Just to show how important the air freight element is, please.
Well, as a group, Blue Skies employs over 7,000 people in Ghana at its peak. The business employs 5,000 people, and you can times that by 10 to give an indication of the number of people within communities, dependents who rely on the business. And also, we can that number didn't include the farmers, small scale farmers, medium scale farmers who supply into Blue Skies and the all the local businesses, be it packaging businesses and all the sort of services that Blue Skies relies on. So plays a huge part in the local economy. It's one of the biggest private sector employers in Ghana. And it's because we as a business believe in the ethos of adding value at source, making the finished product in the country where the fruit grows, and therefore generating employment opportunities for skills development and value added produce.
Okay, just succinctly, what would happen if air freight stopped overnight? What would happen to Blue Skies in Ghana and all those people that you just mentioned?
Well, it would be a disaster. I mean, our business relies on air freight to get our products to market. Without a route to market, we wouldn't have a viable business. So, in short, there will be a lot of jobs on the line. Those that are directly employed by Blue Skies and everyone who's indirectly impacted. So yeah, it would have a significant and detrimental impact.
Thank you. And just to remind everyone that the 10 fastest growing cities are all in Africa. So if they can look to do trade and utilize air freight, it's going to benefit them, the economy, and all those individuals involved. James, introduce yourself, please.
Good afternoon. I'm James McGregor. I'm an environmental economist. I was instrumental working with stakeholders for Fairmiles, the first Fairmiles 18 years ago, where we successfully defended the right of grape farmers across Africa and other parts of the global south to export their produce to the UK and to Europe using air freight. We coined the term Fairmiles to indicate that actually there's a huge benefit to this trade from a development point of view, but also from an economic viewpoint. And so that's how it came about. And I've been working on the research with Exeter University and various other partners this second iteration.
Thank you. James is an utter expert in this field. I think we're very lucky, very, very blessed to have him for, as Simon indicated, Fair Miles Mode 2.0. James, thank you. Ebenezer, who are you? Who are you representing, please?
Thank you so much, Max. Lovely to be with you today. So my name is Dr. Beanstalk. I'm an associate professor of sustainable development law, currently at the University of Northampton, and chair of the university's Centre for Sustainable Business Practices. And I'm very, very glad to, of course, be part of Fairmiles, supporting the work of the initiative through research, specifically in the area of climate justice, but not limited to that. We're also drawing in other elements of sustainability generally, particularly in relation to net zero and decarbonisation as well.
And we were joking in the green room about presidents and prime ministers. Follow Ebenezer. Ebenezer and his team are mercurial in what they do at the university. And also, I think there's further things for our Ebenezer. So it's great to have you on and your expertise. And just to say, we got apologies from Morag Webb, the great Morag, head of science and policy at COLEAD, and she's busy on another appointment today, but sends her apologies, and hopefully she'll be dialing in to see what the four of us are talking about. So just to our quick agenda, a reminder of the problem, and then an update of what Fairmiles has done over the past 18 months. James, let's go back to you. We've sort of had it on the ground from Simon. What is your perspective of the problem? What's the problem as you see it today with your extra of years in this area? What do you see as the problem, please?
So there are many challenges when we're trying to support relatively poor people, farmers or workers or small and medium enterprises anywhere in the world. We need the right enabling framework. We need huge benefits, but low barriers to entry. What we have with the air freight of fresh produce from the global south into Europe and the UK and the rest of the high value world. One of the big benefits that we have there is that we've got interesting, new, affordable methods for you as a farmer to access these markets. This all sounds very good on paper. However, there are always challenges with trade, and the whole environmental complex, which has been around for a couple of generations now. And we've certainly known about climate change for a long time, but how do you as a business, or how does a business or a corporation make decisions around what is good for the environment, and how can their businesses contribute to that? The challenge is, without science, without good data, without good policy direction, it's very easy to make badly informed decisions, which are actually much worse, sort of for the environmental aspect that you're trying to benefit. The first time around in 2006, we had supermarkets seeking to prove that they were lowering carbon emissions, and that was the language that was used. Rather than look into the very complex supply chains that go into supermarkets, and also, I think it's 70,000 products for an average supermarket retailer in the UK. Rather than going down that route, there was a feeling that it would be cheaper and better to choose particular sectors. So those products that are air freighted in, which it's relatively easy to understand if they're fresh and if they have the provenance written on the packet, you can quickly deduce that these have come by air. and there were decisions made by some supermarkets that this is what should be affected. We worked back then through funding from the British government and many other governments, and also the private sector around the UK and Europe and in Africa to better understand these trades, put some data to it. When we put the data together, showing that over a million livelihoods were supported by the fresh fruit and produce trade into the UK, that radically changed how the supermarkets, the government, and importantly, consumers saw these products. They saw them as being something beneficial that they should be proud to consume. And that appears to have, I wouldn't say solved the problem, but it gave us a great launch pad then over the past intervening almost 20 years to grow that trade and grow it in a way, like Simon was saying, very, very profitably, both for the companies, but also as a good income source for communities across Africa and other parts of the global south. The challenge has again reared its head with the net zero legislation in the UK, which is being closely tracked and followed by the European Union countries and many other countries around the world, that are seeing that reducing your carbon emissions or your carbon dioxide emissions is something that is now being legislated for and mandated for. However, we are lacking the data, and companies are lacking the framework to be able to make wise, informed scientific decisions. And again, they're making choices using, based on knee-jerk reactions. So we set the consortium up again to address this, and we've been looking at re-looking at some of these data, and we find that the numbers are much higher. It's nearer 18 million livelihoods across the global south, which are supported by the air freight of fresh produce into Europe, and Europe does include those countries not in the European Union, so like the UK. Yeah. So I hope that gives a bit of perspective on where we came on this and ultimately what we see the main challenge as.
James, thank you. The only thing you could ever predict is change. Do you think the problem that you've just eloquently presented, do you think it's getting worse or better?
The big challenge is the lack of data and the lack of a guiding framework. We do not have that guiding framework, and Ebenezer and Simon can talk about their attempts in this space to develop one. The big challenge that you get is lots of companies to design their own, or there are lots of competing versions out there, and we need to take this back to being a risk-based and a science-based approach. It feels right now that we're a long way from that. However, net zero legislation in general is a very good thing. It causes firms, corporations across Europe to forensically look into their supply chains, the decisions that they make, how they integrate these issues into their business models, which is extremely positive. So we're in that kind of, you mentioned the word transition earlier, we're definitely in a flux space at the moment where that's all happening. And so I'm optimistic, but I'm also very aware of how decisions do get made. And if I was a big corporation faced with a huge bill to look into my supply chains, understand my data better, I would see it as a bargain to be able to get my communications department to write a simple press release demonizing something like air freight.
Yeah. Ebenezer, from academia, what's your perspective of this problem, please?
Yes, thanks, Max. I think James has covered a lot. But just to add on to what's already been said from a research point of view, there's quite a lot of research going on in this particular area. And I think one of the key things that I would like to highlight is the progress that's been made when it comes to research around, just climate justice generally, but also just transition principles, and trying to produce the knowledge that helps people to understand that the choice between the environment and the economy is a false choice. And we can have both, and we should have both, because both are linked. The economy is the environment, and one cannot survive without the other. And so there has to now be, I think, a shift in how we think about this, and how we sort of progress in terms of taking action on, yes, the need for us to be able to transition, to decarbonize, and to move away from the sorts of practices that are driving climate change. But then to do so in a way which ensures that livelihoods are protected and there aren't unintended consequences which flow from from that. And very often we have political leaders, policymakers, and other leaders in other parts of society from different social systems who bring this down to a choice between the economy and the environment. And the thinking is that, well, if you choose the environment, then you're going to lose out on the economy. And if you choose the economy, then you're going to lose out on the environment. And I think from a research point of view with Fairmiles, what we're saying is that, well, there's a middle ground there. And that's what climate justice, is about. It's about threading, middle ground to ensure that we can achieve what we want to achieve with the environment, but do so by protecting economic interests, and we can achieve both. And lastly, let me just say this. I think you mentioned, Max, at the beginning, around Africa and population size, etc. Interestingly, the UN released a report in July of this year, in which one of the key findings was that Africa's population has crossed the 1.5 billion point. And that what that means at the moment is that Africa is at the center of population growth globally, and the population of Africa is driving, the global rate at which obviously the global population is rising, at the moment, and so with that, the projection is that by 2050, Africa's population will be at 2.5 billion on the current trajectory. And we can't do net zero in a way which cuts out 1.5 to 2.5 billion people in the next 20 or so years. We've got to apply these climate justice principles. We've got to do it properly. We've got to protect economic interests. And we've got to make sure that we bring everybody along. And I think that's what would work best. And I think that's what Fairmiles is about. So that's a challenge we have. And we're trying to, to address that through knowledge, through research, and also through forums like this, where we get to discuss the challenges.
Ebenezer, thank you. And without crossing a line deep into politics, but we can't avoid it. New administration coming in the States in the new year. Ebenezer, do you think that's is something to be excited about in the respect of Fairmiles and the direction of Fairmiles?
Yeah, I think it's well in terms of the US. So of course, the US is a big player in the world on every front, and of course, American policy has a direct impact elsewhere in the world. From a Fairmiles perspective, it's not something that is of direct concern. Of course, we wait to see what the Trump administration will do, even though there is a good deal of speculation or expectation around what his administration will do, given obviously what occurred during his first administration and given what he has put forward as his policy positions during the election. However, with all of that said, I think there are a lot of people, generally speaking, in the climate change movement, and in circles of expertise where there's a great concern about what's going on with climate change, who are worried about the position of the United States under a Trump presidency and what it might mean for climate action. And of course that is a genuine concern. I think of course we hope for the best and we wish for the best. But at the end of the day, of course, we are interested as a Fairmiles group in working with all collaborators who want to be on board and want to pursue this agenda with us. And of course, if there's anyone listening from the United States who wants to get in touch, who wants to come on board and collaborate with us, we would be more than willing to do that, irrespective of the policies that obviously are promulgated at the federal government level.
Yeah, well, Ebenezer, well said. I do a lot of work with the IFPA, International Fresh Produce Association in the States, and they've got representatives in South America and South Africa, and also Australia. And I'm going to send them a copy of this broadcast just to get their views on it. But as we said earlier, the only thing you can predict is change, and again, that's why the likes of Fairmiles are so important to give that understanding as to why this area, why this area is so important to the sector. Simon, update on what Fairmiles has done over the past 18 months. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Max. A huge amount. I think James was talking earlier on about research and the importance for getting more and better data to help us make better decisions. So that's been certainly a focus for us over the past 18 months is doing that research. And with the help of University of Northampton, University of Exeter, and our friends at COLEAD, we've been able to do quite a lot of research. Firstly, the baseline study through the University of Northampton, which is a published piece of research, looking at many of the things that Ebenezer just spoke about in terms of the climate justice perspective, but looking at what sort of literature there is out there already on this issue. And then beyond that, doing more research to understand, currently how many livelihoods are impacted by air freighted fresh produce from the global south into Europe. And as James just mentioned, that research indicated that it's higher than what was previously expected. And of course, we've seen a lot of growth in trade over the years. So the research that we did indicated that around 18 million, or I should say at least 18 million livelihoods are benefit from air freighted fresh produce from the global south. But also just looking at some of the other benefits and impacts of air freight as well, looking at the number of direct jobs that are benefited, looking at indirect jobs, and looking at some of the areas where air freight is able to open access to new markets, to provide opportunities for technology transfer, skills development, all the kinds of things that we see with Blue Skies. So it's been putting more rigorous research behind some of a lot of what we always thought to be the case, but backing that up with data. We were talking about the USA. One of our colleagues at the University of Exeter is going to be making a presentation about the data at the remind me, James, it's the Data Sciences Institute conference in Phoenix, I think.
Yes, that's correct. Later this month.
So and that was kind of building on the research that we did, and looking at how we can show these figures to be more robust, so that we can present them in conferences like these. And I know that with the help of Ebenezer and the University of Northampton, we're also looking to publish some of this more recent research as well. So research data has been a big focus over the last 18 months, but also engaging with the key stakeholders. So, we get this information, we get this data, which hopefully helps us to kind of understand the reality in terms of the impacts that the kinds of decisions that we make to achieve net zero can have. Then what can we do with that? So what we want to do is bring all the key stakeholders. Sorry, the lights have just gone off here. We bring all the key stakeholders round the table to look at the kind of key arguments and really kind of consider among us, what should be the best approach. So we've had a number of different roundtables. We had one at the end of December last year with yourself, Max, in London. That was at the University of Exeter's premises in London. We had a roundtable in Brussels. That was an EU event. We had the EU Trade Commissioner attending that, and a number of others from Fairmiles, but also people representing fresh produce companies. And we had over 200 people attending that. And we had a really good discussion, just getting a sense of what people's views were on this, but also looking at the next steps. How could we take this forward? What should we do with this data? Because ultimately we want to get to a situation where, as James and Ebenezer have spoken about, where we are avoiding those unintended consequences, where we are not, we are not through good intentions having negative impacts. How can we ensure that we take the best approach to achieve that? And one of the things that came out of that Brussels round table, and something that we've often been talking about, is how can we develop guidelines? How can we develop approaches, frameworks that enable the buyers, the people that are making decisions about how we achieve net zero, to do so in as fair a way as possible, encouraging to look at the data and take into account all of the different factors rather than just focusing on one or two. That gives it hopefully an overview of what we've done. It's about research, it's about engagement, and what's next. It's about ensuring that we're able to contribute meaningfully by providing some of those sort of guidelines and support to help us hopefully avoid making those decisions that lead to unintended consequences in the future.
Simon, thank you. And as per the dreamliner that's going through my head at 32,000 feet, one element that perhaps we don't talk too much about, but is key to all of this, is the aviation. James, thoughts on aviation in respect to Fairmiles?
Yeah, when we speak about companies and consumers demonizing aviation or air freight, we've got to really ask, what are we really talking about here, and how is it going to contribute to reducing carbon emissions? There's lots of data on the carbon emissions from each mile and each passenger mile for all forms of transport, and these are reasonably hotly contested, but aviation is up there. It is one of the highest when you use those metrics alone. But if we're going to be talking about, and you mentioned earlier, Max, stopping the import into Europe of fresh produce from, for instance, Ghana, and the impact that that's having. And Simon gave a great example there of the quite wide-ranging and high impact economically and socially and etc. for his business, but also the communities. Are we saying here in the UK that we're going to stop exporting salmon? Are we going to stop exporting tourists to these destinations? Is that what we're talking about? Or or do we consider quite naively that we will continue to do this, but we are allowed to make the choice about what comes onto these planes, coming back. So we do need to take a scientific look at this, and we need to look at where the drivers are, what are the incentives, and what is really going to make a change. If we go to transition to a low carbon economies, we need to be mindful about the decisions that we make and how those impact everything. We see 18 million livelihoods in the global south supported through trade, through air freight, is through the consumer demand in Europe. What is the number of livelihoods in Europe and North America that is supported by the exports of tourists and the exports of goods to these countries? We don't have those data to hand, but it's likely to be significant as well. Maybe it's roughly the same number. But bear in mind that the UK exports 10 times as much to African countries as it imports, from a value point of view and from a volume point of view. So you start to look at metrics like that, and the science becomes a lot less clear. So all of the demonization around these issues, we need to be looking at not only unintended consequences, but also how do we even begin to be able to make those decisions? How do we begin to weigh livelihoods in rural areas of developing countries where low carbon, these are already low carbon economies. These are typically using much lower inputs, much higher labor inputs, and the product is typically of a higher quality because it's grown under the sun. When you're looking at fresh produce, are we going to be looking at how do we make a decision of weighing that against the carbon emissions of the UK or the carbon dioxide emissions of Kenya? How do we begin to make that decision? And will stopping or demonizing the air freight of fresh produce make that happen, or will it actually just show us that's actually a really bad approach to this whole issue? Just a very last point here. We saw some research recently saying that over the next 20 years, the number of planes will increase by 40,000 around the world. There's a number of estimates, but they are around that number. It's roughly 6 new planes a day, and that's a very big number. But that number links very well with what Ebenezer was saying: higher global populations, higher middle income communities in relatively poor countries that will be able to afford air freight and air travel themselves. We could be looking in 2040 at a very different situation where, air freight and passengers coming from Africa are the reason that we have planes arriving in London. But right now, that is not the case at all.
Yeah.
Well
done. Well done. I think it was really important to get that segue in respect to aviation. Ebenezer, we're in the middle of COP29. How do we take a fair approach to net zero in respect of COP29? And Ebenezer, what are your hopes for COP29, please?
Well, that's a million-dollar question, Mac, in terms of what my hopes are for COP29. I think, the first thing to say is of course that we can always hope that these obviously events will produce the kind of progress that we need, and I'm not going to prejudge the outcome of COP29. It remains to be seen what comes out of Baku, and who knows, we could get something amazing come out, and let's wait and see. But the immediate observation, of course, that I make is that there's a lot of the key representations that are not there, at that, event, and it makes, you think about, what that, what it might achieve. So, for example, there's several G20, leaders who are not there at the moment, and of course that is a big sort of thing to highlight, given that there is that sort of engagement that is required to make the sort of commitments that need to be made to drive the agenda forward. What I would like to see come out of COP29, if I had sort of I could snap my finger and make it happen, is for the rest of the world to receive that support that it needs in terms of climate adaptation funding, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, there have been pledges made on this in the past, but it's not really materialized. And without that support, the rest of the world can't do it. And that's just a fact. If we're all going to transition together, then we all must transition together. And if we all don't transition together, then we all won't transition together. And so, for me, this is the main, sort of issue, and it's very much linked to what we're trying to talk about in relation to Fairmiles. You've heard a lot from James and Simon about, the number of livelihoods, impacted by air freight and supported, by air freight. And if, of course, we pursue net zero in a way which stops all of that, activity at once, then of course there's the question of what happens to all of those livelihoods. Where are all those people going to go? What are they going to do, etc., etc. And of course, this is something that climate adaptation funding, can help, to support, to make sure that we can transition, in a just way. For me personally, I don't think that the key is to stop aviation, because you can't stop aviation. It's here to stay. The world is a global village. We are connected more than ever before. Technology is driving that connectivity, and that's not going to end. So for anyone who's listening, who's thinking, well, the answer is just stop flying, that's just not going to happen. Because even if everybody agrees that we should not fly in fresh cut fruit from Ghana or Benin or Brazil or wherever it is in the global south, no, very few people will agree that we should stop flying altogether, not to take our holidays, to the sunny parts of places like South Africa, and to sort of exotic beaches in Mauritius, etc. And even if we stop, transporting fresh cut fruit and other products by air freight, those flights would continue anyway. So I think for me, the answer is, how do we get the support? How do we get the support that the global south needs to do things like, to support with climate adaptation, but also to do things like fast track and accelerate the decarbonization of aviation, which is challenging because it requires a lot of funding. And that's one of the key things that I would like to see come out of this COP event.
James, Simon, your hopes for COP29 in relation to Fairmiles? James, you go first.
There's been a lot of talk about this being the COP of climate finance, and of the private sector. It's good to see a lot of my clients and colleagues from the private sector are attending this particular event. So great hope that they can engage properly with the process and with the thousands of entities that are represented, and better understand how they can take it forward for their businesses, but also for their supply chains, and ultimately the regulators and their customers. So my hopes are that we agree that a scientific approach is important, and that we can accelerate the development of frameworks which can help businesses better understand how to get to net zero in countries around the world, but also how best to make decisions when we have development issues. This is a huge, has been a huge topic at COPs, that all the ones that I've been to, over the last 25 years. And I think it's really important that we now seize that nettle. And I think with more businesses involved, we've got a greater chance of bringing this really into the boardrooms from a tangible point of view. A lot of the clients I work with are worried, concerned, feel that the benefits to their business are not going to be served by going down this particular route of fact finding and working with stakeholders. But I think increasingly the benefits considerably outweigh the risks. And there's, as Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, said yesterday, this is a great opportunity to lead. And I think it still is a great opportunity. And a number of the Fairmiles Consortium are currently leading on this, and a lot of our members are. And so, we definitely welcome that with open arms. But we'd like it to be easier for everybody.
Well, brilliant. Simon, your views of COP29 in relation to Fairmiles? What you hope to get from it?
Well, I'd say, to keep it simple, well, firstly, to keep climate on the agenda. And as Ebenezer said, I think there's concerns that there are, key figures that aren't in attendance. So obviously that's a worry, but, are we seeing more climate skepticism globally as people are sort of fatigued maybe by approaches to net zero? So I would like to see out of this COP to maybe some more pragmatic approaches, maybe a different approach to how we address climate change. If the COPs aren't working as perhaps they could be, if we're not kind of seeing the outcomes from them that we should be seeing, are there alternative approaches? So I hope, that we have a successful summit, and that it does keep climate change high on the agenda as something we ought to be looking at. But we may need to consider alternative approaches too. Secondly, I'd say, again, linked to what Ebenezer and James were saying, ensure that we give a voice to the Global South. Not that we give a voice, it sounds rather arrogant, but the Global South has a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Because quite often it can be sort of Western perspectives that get the headlines, that are heard over others, when actually, as Ebenezer said, that with the population growth that we're seeing in the continent of Africa, it's so important that we ensure that Africa has an opportunity to lead the way, because actually that's where we're going to see opportunity, we're going to see growth, we're going to see development. So ensuring that we give a voice, that the Global South has a voice on the table of these conferences, and then we address these concerns around climate justice, just transition, to ensure that we're taking a fair approach, that as far as possible there's a level playing field. I think that's vitally important. So I'd like to see this whole idea of just transition, really promoted at this COP. So they're the two ones. The third one as well, I just mentioned it, is around aviation, ensuring that we give aviation the opportunity to make its case. As we've said, it's not about reducing the amount of flights we take, whether that's looking at it in terms of its social or its economic benefit, also the indirect environmental benefits. And it brings us together to debate these kinds of topics, to find solutions. Aviation does play a significant part. It has an important role to play. So simply saying, let's stop flying, isn't going to solve the problem. It might just end up making the problem a whole lot worse. So actually exploring that and giving aviation the platform as well as some of the other key transport and distribution channels, I think I'd like to see as well. And I see that there are a number of events, of talks on this particular topic, including very recently. I think it was it came out. It was in the press yesterday about the impact of contrails, and we can significantly reduce emissions from aviation if we just address how planes produce contrails, and if we change the route slightly, it can have a dramatic impact.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're the three things I'd sort of say would be good to come out of this COP.
Well done, James. As our COP expert, as he attended the number, just had a WhatsApp saying that although Biden is not at COP, his delegation is there. Do you need that figurehead like a Biden there, even though his negotiation team are there?
The interesting thing about COPs is that they work on many levels. You've got the diplomatic international level, you've got the negotiations level, and the for making decisions, which is where you see the pictures, which we'll see in 2 weeks, of people slumped, asleep and maybe cheering, over their desks. Then you've got all of the pavilions and side events which go on, which is where people are really interacting, as Simon was saying there. Everyone's flown into Baku. Let's be quite clear. It's challenging. You can just about do it on a train and with some boats, but everyone's flown in there, and there's going to be a lot of opportunities to learn from different perspectives. And so ultimately, do you need a figurehead? It's questionable as to whether you need one to get the negotiations to a point where countries decide on things. But definitely, from getting press, from getting the news agencies interested, from getting people talking about who's there and who isn't, and what their perspectives are, I think it's really critical. And I've got a lot of contacts over there at the moment. Seen lots of excellent discussions and meetings that have already gone on, and we obviously wish everybody well and hope that the resolutions fit with the discussion we've been having here today. Let's make it about science. Let's make it about development and emissions, and let's just not make it about emissions, but also remember that to be genuinely sustainable, you also need to involve biodiversity, nature, water, marine, etc. And these are extra considerations, but really important to make sure that we have a balanced scorecard when we're making making decisions, and to realize that as businesses and as countries, our risks do not begin and end with our carbon dioxide emissions. They're far wider than that, as a range of the news stories over the last couple of months, very much attest.
Yeah. James, thank you. Gentlemen, just to wrap up, collaboration. There's already been a lot of collaboration in the respect of Fairmiles. What's next for Fairmiles, and what additional collaboration would you like to see? Just to wrap up this broadcast, Ebenezer, you go first.
Yes, thanks, James. I think for me personally, I would like to put out an open sort of invitation to anyone who is listening from the food retail sector who would be happy to collaborate with us, to reach out to us, and also anyone from within the research sector. Obviously, collaborators from the food retail sector are very, very, very key to us, because we want to work with them to provide the necessary support that is required in terms of the research, etc., that we've done, to help them craft balanced net zero policies. And I think we started off this conversation by talking about, the fact that we need the right information to make net zero implementation decisions, or net zero policy implementation decisions. And so for us, being able to collaborate with these collaborators from the food retail sector is important. And also for the for researchers who may be out there in the academic community, or even within industry, we will be happy to collaborate with you as well, to help drive a lot of the research that we're currently doing, and to help expand that further, to better understand not just the economic impacts of limiting or banning air freight, but some of the social and cultural impacts as well, and what it really means for for us as a global community.
Ebenezer, thank you. James, what's next for Fairmiles 2.0? And you out of the four of us, you've got the longest length of time with Fairmiles. What do you want to see next for Fairmiles?
Just building on what Ebenezer said there, we have got a lot of collaborators. We're working with research institutes and businesses, but the critical thing here is about bringing all of this together, getting the message out there. We know that there's a lot of data we're not including. There's a lot of perspectives, programs, work going on in countries that we're unaware of. So we would very much be open to speaking with other, UN and intergovernmental organizations that are working in this space, so that we can begin, collaborating and ultimately forming a body of work that is commonly shared, so that we, when we're talking about these big facts about the number of livelihoods, for instance, this is a figure which everybody agrees on. At the moment, it's initial research, and so we can say at least. But we're very keen to take that further, and it's not just about the research, but it's about what we can do with that research, how we can parlay that into better livelihoods on the ground, securing those supply chains, and making sure that those livelihoods of the excellent farmers around the world and farm workers are something that can be secured. I'm saying perpetuity, but can be secured for as long as possible, and are not under threat.
James, thank you. Simon, wrap up for us. In your perspective, what's next for Fairmiles?
Well, I think we talked a bit about COP. We're not at COP right now, but we want to have our own COP. about how can we bring all the different stakeholders together. We're not going to fly to Baku, but we might get the train to Basingstoke or wherever we have our COP or virtually, because we want to have the opportunity to bring all the stakeholders together. And Ebenezer mentioned it. I think it's an open invitation. If you want to join us, if you want to get involved, if you want to engage with us to help us to take the right approach, or if you're struggling, if actually how you take the right approach, if you're a decision maker, for instance, you're under a lot of pressure. Making decisions on how we can achieve net zero is not easy. So it can sometimes be tempting to go for the low hanging fruit or what appears to be the easiest decision, which may not end up being the best decision, but it's the right intentions. But how can we help? So we want to listen firstly. What pressures are people under? And it might be pressures from NGOs, it might be pressures from consumer groups. How can we help to provide the right information to bring everyone on board with what we're trying to achieve, to make informed decisions, to make fair decisions, to ensure that, ultimately we can achieve net zero, but we can also achieve it in a way which ensures, a bright future for all of us. And I think that's ultimately what we're trying to achieve. We don't want to achieve net zero just for a select few, because that gets us nowhere. In order for us to achieve net zero, for us to have the right impact on climate change, but also other issues, whether it's around human rights, around biodiversity, around how we protect our natural resources, we need to look at all of these things in the round and do things in a way which benefits everyone, as many people as possible. As I think the saying of the SDGs goes, leave no one behind. And that's what we're trying to do.
Well done. I haven't come across a more human and authentic organisation such as Fairmiles for a number of years because of the difference that they're making. And Ebenezer, you're very blessed that you've just been out to Ghana on a research study, and I don't need to tell you about the difference that you can see that the likes of Blue Skies, but more importantly, the fresh produce that they're growing is making to that ecosystem there, and the fresh produce that we all consume here makes us better, makes us more healthy. But we do need to have this. Have the product transported across the globe in the most efficient way possible, and Fairmiles is here to assist. James, Ebenezer, anything else to say before we wrap up? So we got lots more coming up with Fairmiles. We'll put the Fairmiles website on this post. Please follow it on all the social media posts, and we'll alert you as to the next broadcast we have. I love your idea, Simon, about a COP for Fairmiles to have that collaboration, and I think we might be able to find somewhere slightly more exotic than Basingstoke. I'm thinking somewhere around Northampton, perhaps. But let us see, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time, and wish you all the best for the future. And let's all keep in contact with Fairmiles, a force for good. Thank you, everyone.